Okay, I reckon let's get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Simon Copland, and I am the Executive Director at the Conservation Council in the ACT region. I'd like to thank you all for attending our Western Edge campaign update. And particular thanks as well to Joe Clay, MLA, and Hannah Vardy from Senator Pocock's office for joining us for this event as well. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the land of the Ngunnawal people, and pay respects to elders past and present, and obviously acknowledge all Aboriginal people who have a connection with the lands in the ACT and the surrounding region, and anybody who is attending today. This is particularly important for this topic because the management of land, caring for country is obviously central to any justice for Aboriginal people and for any decolonisation that happens in the ACT in Australia more broadly. And there are already active conversations about how Aboriginal folks could be central to managing this land, the Western Edge, if and when we get development taken off the table on this in this area. And so I'm sure there'll be some conversations about that today. And so I think it's really important that we centre those conversations in this discussion and in this debate. So I'd like to acknowledge that work and the folks who might be here today and who are doing that work. So what is the purpose of today's event? So we wanted to give you an update from the Conservation Council's perspective, an update on the Western Edge campaign. We launched our Western Edge campaign in August, but we also acknowledge that there are other people who are doing really important work on the Western Edge. In particular, we've invited here today the ACT Greens from the Assembly and Senator David Pocock's office, as both are doing really valuable work, really important work on the Western Edge. And we wanted to give you all a sense of how these different campaigns are being run, how they intersect, and the different components to them, so you have a sense of what's going on. So how will today run? Each of our speakers, that's myself, Joe, and Hannah, will have about 10 minutes to present on our different components of the campaign. I apologise in advance. We did have a facilitator for this, but he had to pull out sick, so I'm both facilitating and presenting, which is it's a little awkward, but we'll make it work. And then once we've done the presentations, we'll have about 20 minutes or so for questions. We'll do questions via the chat function, ideally. With a group this large, it's best to do that. So if you have a question at any point of time, you can feel free to pop it in the chat. And Aveen is sitting next to me. She's doing tech support and also will be sort of coordinating the questions. So if you've got a question, please pop it in the chat and Aveen will filter those out and pass them on to us as presenters, and we'll do those at the end of the presentation. Note as well that we are recording this and we'll be putting the recording up online after this on the Conservation Council YouTube. I believe that Joe and Hannah both have slides, and so they've both offered to say that those slides can be shared as part of that. So if you want to see the slides later on, you don't have to spend your time hurriedly now making notes. So from there, I will get us started. And this is the little awkward moment where I shift from facilitator to presenter and start with one of our three presentations. So I wanted to start talking about the Western Edge from the perspective of the Conservation Council and why we've taken up this particular issue at this particular point of time. So what is the Western Edge? Let's start with that because we are still getting questions about this in our campaign. And it's a really important, obviously, thing for people to understand. So the Western Edge is a really important patch of critically endangered ecosystem to the Canberra's west, which is up at the moment for unsustainable, unaffordable, and we think dangerous development by the ACT government. So this is an area to the west of the Molonglo Valley, on the other side of Blewett's Block and Mount Stromlo, that runs from the south of Belconnen all the way to the north of Canberra. And if you understand ACT geography, you'd recognise that is a huge amount of land. And the values of this land are quite numerous, and you can see all of these values on our website. But I just want to go through them really briefly. So it's 9,800 hectares of beautiful yet critically endangered ecosystems. And it has a whole range of different values. So it's a sacred Ngunnawal site. It's located on unceded Ngunnawal country and is a place of ancient and continuing Ngunnawal custodianship and cultural heritage. Particularly the Molonglo River, which features many occupation sites and is part of Ngunnawal songlines and trading routes, and that's a really central part of this campaign. Is the linkage to the Murrumbidgee River. It's a protective buffer. It acts as a protective buffer for thousands of residents in Canberra's western suburbs from bushfires, extreme heat and flooding, all of which are to occur with greater frequency with climate change. And particular bushfire risk is a really serious one. If you go out to the Western Edge, you'll see on the other side of the Murrumbidgee is the Bulleen Ranges, which is a heavily forested area. And the bushfire risk of putting houses close to the Murrumbidgee is quite serious. The Western Edge, it's a barrier to urban sprawl. It's a natural barrier to urban sprawl, and urban sprawl is something we're talking a lot about in this campaign. Urban sprawl is when cities expand out forever, and they have major impacts both on nature as well as on climate. When you create more sprawl, it creates more car-dependent suburbs, which are harder to service for public transport, for other forms of services. It separates people from each other and the services they need, which requires costly private vehicle use and increased emissions. The area is also an ecological sanctuary. It features beautiful rivers, woodlands, and grasslands, and is home to many rare plants and animals, including the superb parrot, the platypus, the orchids, microbats, the Macquarie perch, the slender-tailed dunnart, the pink-tailed worm lizard, the Murray River crayfish, and the yellow-footed antechinus, I think is how you say that. And finally, no, not finally, it's also a place to relax and play. And I think a lot of people go and enjoy the Murrumbidgee River. And it's a really important area for bushwalking, swimming, biking, kayaking, fishing, all of these types of things. And then finally, it's also an example of an area of sustainable agriculture. And Aveen, our campaigner, and I recently were able to go out to have a look at some farms, a farm on the Western Edge. And it was an area that where we saw farmers doing real sustainable agriculture that integrated with these environmental values. And there are leading examples within the Western Edge of this work. And this is a risk that we're going to be also cutting into our food bowl here in the ACT for this further sustainable development. And so recognising all of these values, the Conservation Council has been really concerned about potential development in this area for a very long time. And there is a real risk of the government developing this area. And the government has been investigating this, the potential development in the Western Edge for many years now. And I think Jo will speak to this a little bit more in her presentation. And they have been purchasing land in the area. The Suburban Land Agency has been actively purchasing land in the area, including purchasing agricultural land and then leasing it back to farmers, which indicates a desire to own that land for potential suburban development in the future. The government is really wanting to look beyond Molonglo. What is next in the development phase? And I think that they have a belief that we need to have continued suburban sprawl for the city to grow, and that is something that we are really concerned about. But we have an opportunity, we believe, at the same time to really knock this on its head, this potential development. And that was based off a motion put forward by Joe Clay earlier in the year, which was really to push the government to set an urban boundary for the ACT. And the government has agreed to set an urban boundary. And an urban boundary would be a boundary in which we decide where we're going to contain our urban development. And that boundary is going to be set by the middle of 2027. So we have a unique opportunity here, 2 years, in which we could push the government to ensure the Western Edge is outside of that boundary and is protected, and that we focus on how we can do proper, sustainable urban infill rather than further spread. We think this is a key opportunity, and that's why we have launched the campaign now to give ourselves 2 years to really put the community pressure on the government to ensure that urban boundary doesn't include the Western Edge and this area can be protected into the future. So what are we asking? The Conservation Council at this stage of the campaign is asking for three real things. And this is not exclusive, but it's the first stage of the campaign and what we're asking for the ACT government. And we're really focused on the ACT government, and you might hear, particularly from Hannah, about other asks for the federal government as well. So we've launched a petition on this issue, and we're asking that the government keep the Western Edge outside of the to-be-set ACT urban boundary, so to decide actively not to develop that area. to take the Western Edge out of ACT government's development plans, and that's effectively to stop any further investigations into the potential of developing this area. And then ensure that the Western Edge is sufficiently protected and managed for its ecological, cultural, and recreational values. And we just want to put a note here that we haven't set what that management looks like. We're not necessarily suggesting a full nature park over the area. There are some current sustainable land uses already in that area, for example, sustainable agriculture. But what we want the government to do is proactively think about how to best manage that land for these different values, and what are the areas that might, for example, go into nature reserve, what areas might stay in agriculture, what areas might stay as recreational areas, for example. So finally, what are we doing in our campaign? So you've probably seen that we launched a petition in August that asked these three things of the ACT government, and we've had a huge amount of huge response from that. So I checked today, and we have 1,133 signatures on that petition. And that petition is going to be continuing to run until about April next year, when we're intending to do a big delivery event and rally at the Legislative Assembly. We haven't set a date for that yet, but that's our intention, to be doing that in early next year. So we have plenty of time to continue building petition numbers and to getting more and more people signing up to that. And we've had some real success with this. So for example, one of our supporters, the Copland Park Care Group, went out to the Coolman Court last on the weekend, just doing a basic stall, and they managed to get 112 signatures just from a couple of hours, which really shows it's not just our community who's concerned about this, but the broader Canberra community. This is going out and talking to people who aren't on our email list, for example. So as I said, then we've got community stalls going on. So we had a community stall at Hague Park over the weekend. We're having more community stalls coming up at public events like Southfest in the future. Really doing what we can to get out to the community to talk to them about this issue as much as possible. We've also organised a series of walks, which are being led by volunteers, often from our member groups, who are out showing people what the Western Edge, the values of the Western Edge, and showing different components of this. So we've had walks run by the Canberra Bushwalking Club, by Friends of Blewett's Block, by the Coolman Park Care Group, by Canberra Birds, showing all of these different components. And Aveen will soon post links around this or all of these events on there. On the Zoom chat, sorry. And we've also got a big event coming up, celebrating our Western Edge event, which is happening on the 8th of October, 8th of November at the Arboretum, which we're getting the community together to celebrate the Western Edge, have a community picnic, celebrate what we've done, and talk about the next plans. Finally, we're getting a documentary maker. We've managed through some fundraising campaigns to get enough funds to be able to hire a documentary maker who's going to make a hard-hitting documentary about the impacts of urban sprawl on our environment. And we'll be looking at doing a film screening of that and spreading that documentary as far and wide as possible to really boost understanding and boost the conversation about what urban sprawl means for Canberra and how we can do things a bit better. So how can you help before I then hand over to Joe and Hannah? So there are a number of ways, and as I said, Aveen is just going to pop this into the chat very soon, or already has done so. Thank you. I'm not following the chat myself, but there are a number of ways that you can help with this campaign. One is to sign the petition. Obviously, if you haven't signed the petition, please do so now. You can volunteer by coming particularly to volunteer at a stall, or if you want to help with communications or in other things in the campaign, you can come into our office. So contact us and come to our office, and we will have plenty of tasks for you to do. You can contribute to the campaign. We have a dedicated Western Edge campaign fund. So you can contribute financially to the campaign, and if you do so, that fund money will go into the campaign. We this month hit our first target of $5,000 for that campaign, but future funding will be really helpful in helping us make this campaign bigger. Or come to our walks, or come to our event, the Celebrating Western Edge event, and come and learn more, and then possibly sign up for future activities after that. So I'm going to finish there. That's the Conservation Council's campaign, and I'm going to hand over to Joe, who is going to talk about what the Greens have been doing in the Assembly on this particular issue. So thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks, Simon. I am going to share my screen. And can people see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great, excellent. So I'm Jo Clay. I'm one of the Greens MLAs on the crossbench. That's a picture of me and Rebecca last term. Rebecca was our Greens Environment Minister, and she did a lot of the work on this last term as well. I also chair our Environment and Planning Committee, which is another role I have, and that sometimes has a fairly significant impact on the environmental and planning decisions that we make in the ACT. We have a lot of big problems. Simon's outlined these, and I think I'm probably talking to a room full of people who understand these big problems very well. I was pretty sobered to read the climate risk assessment. I don't know how many people have managed emotionally to wade through that. I did it as quickly as I could to rip the Band-Aid off. It's not great. The housing crisis in the ACT and all around Australia continues to be bad. Our wait list on the public housing wait list has gone from around 3,000 to around 3,500 just this term. So all of the things that our government are doing are failing to actually reduce the wait list. And in fact, that wait list has significantly increased. And that's just one indicator. There's an awful lot of other indicators that the housing crisis is getting worse, not better. And the Greens have a strong view that you can address these problems if you do it holistically and you do not trade off one thing for another. You don't say, oh my God, it's a housing crisis, let's pave everything over and build everywhere. That's not the right approach. So we have been working on protection of Blewett's Block and the Western Edge for a long time. Quite a lot happened last term. The Minister for Planning is Chris Steele. He was the Minister at the end of last term as well. And we had a new act that commenced and a new territory plan that came in as part of that. We've had a number of amendments coming through. The Greens are driving some of this work and supporting quite a lot of this work. We are quite supportive of missing middle work. That for us is the answer about where do you put your homes. You do not put your homes in the Western Edge. You do not continue to bulldoze grasslands and the bush for more and more sprawl. What you do is you build really intelligent missing middle. We also this term have a new Environment Minister, Suzanne Orr. She has fewer statutory powers in this area, but she's a very useful contact to have on environmental issues. So Simon's actually talked about the Western Edge, and I think a lot of people probably know what the Western Edge is, but there's a little bit of a map flashed up there for folk to see. It is a large area. It is highly ecologically sensitive. There's also farmland in there. There's a lot of different types of land in that section, and it is a huge area of the ACT. There's been a lot of studies, and I'll call them development studies. They are the sorts of studies you do before development. There's been 31 of those. That has been a slow piece of work that's been happening with government over the last term and earlier. We're often asked, where are these studies? Quite a lot of them are published. I have been asking parliamentary questions to get updates on where these studies are up to, how many are published, what's been completed. It's quite interesting. I think this campaign is actually moving in a really good direction, unlike most of our environmental campaigns. And I think a lot of that is down to a really good community campaign that's been consistent, a really good evidence base that's coming from the community and community ecologists that is also then verified by the studies. You're getting to this useful spot where all of the information is actually lining up to say the same thing. I think probably the interesting new piece of information, the bushfire risk assessment study was done. We've seen in the climate risk assessment, we know fire is catastrophic and increasing. And I think the latest federal risk assessment has shown us that that is becoming more of a problem. We knew that anyway, but it's interesting to have it set down in ways that government agencies can't really ignore. There's a few more studies still underway. I think it's been making a lot of people very nervous that these studies just keep going without government actually saying, what are we doing with all these studies? Are we actually developing or not? Particularly as the studies keep coming back and returning more and more results that indicate maybe this isn't a very good place to build. And there was for a long time a lack of thought and vision there, which is where people I think got very, very concerned about what these studies were all leading to. I'll skip ahead. We were getting updates that development was a long way off. I think we have now usefully moved into a much better place now. So last term, there was quite a lot of politics about Lewis Block and the Western Edge, and I'll just call it sprawl. Where do you put the homes? We went on a bit of a rinse and repeat cycle in the Assembly where pretty much every single week the Canberra Liberals would come up with a new, let's bulldoze out to Cohen Forest, let's build down past the Murrumbidgee, let's do this, let's do that. Lots and lots of sprawl proposals without a lot of thought behind them. The Greens got locked into a technocratic and not terribly useful debate with Labor, where we had pushed them to make sure that 70% of our urban development would be within our existing footprint. The Greens platform was 80%. And then what we got was a whole lot of accounting, a whole lot of numbers from Labor. And I got very tired of trying to get ministers to add, which is a tedious process that nobody should ever have to watch in estimates. It's really painful. And it wasn't terribly useful. David Pocock has come in with some useful big picture thinking, and I'll leave that for Hannah. We were quite concerned about developer influence when the Planning Minister, Chris Steele, called in development. That happened 2 days after the developer wrote to him and asked him to call it in. So we asked him, did someone ask you to do this? Oh, right. And then we FOI'd it and got that. So that was quite disturbing the way that came about, as well as the fact that it actually happened. Throughout that whole term, there's been some fantastic community work. And I just want to pay tribute to Jean Casman, who worked on this. She's passed away now. This was her last act on this planet. And Alice Wells and the Friends of Lewis Block. There were some useful lessons there. I think when you have a campaign, it's really good to organise. There may only be a few people, but if you we suggested that they organise and become the Friends of Lewis Block, and that's useful. That makes it easier for government to talk to you and about you, and it grows the movement really well, but it's also it gives you a much bigger presence than you would otherwise have. So there were quite a lot of things last term, which then resulted in a call-in and community and Greens outrage of the call-in. And then we decided to do a bit of a reset and move on a bit more usefully this term. And I'm pleased to say that that seems to be working. So with all of that context, I decided that we weren't going to bother with 70-30 or 80-20 or 90-10 or any complicated. It looks like it's time to set city limits. Mature cities set city limits. Let's protect the Western Edge and let's set city limits, and let's just use normal words and let's just say that we're going to do what we're going to do. I put up a motion in April and that motion passed unamended, so supported by Labor and the Liberals, which is really, really useful. And I've put in some of the words of that motion. The full motion and the debate is available in Hansard, and I might afterwards cut and paste that into the chat box for folk. It commits government to protecting the Western Edge and the Eastern Broadacre area, commits to full nature protection, and we've got the first few steps of that full nature protection. We've removed some of the overlays in the planning system already. We gave Labor a time frame and they have so far stuck to that time frame. The time frame is to protect it and to deliver city limits within this term, because we know that you need to deliver things within the parliamentary term where you get the commitment, and you also need to do it early enough from an election that it doesn't suddenly get politicised at the end and all go off the rails. So there's quite a tight timeline for something like this. We have the excellent Conservation Council petition. It's great to see that. It is essential to have a really strong community and environmental campaigning right through this, because whilst we have top line agreement to protect the Western Edge and to set city limits, devil's in the detail, and there is a whole lot of community consultation, planning, and the potential for developer influencer in where those lines go. So actually, the quality of the outcome will probably entirely rest on how well we campaign on this from here on in and how well we deliver. There's a lot of reasons to protect the Western Edge, and Simon did a really good job of that, so I won't run through it again. Anyone who hasn't had a walk out there should definitely go and join one, preferably with one of the very many experts we have in Canberra who can tell you what you're looking at. It's pretty astonishing. But these issues are getting more important, not less. We see from things like the Environment Commissioner's Close to the Edge report that the environment's actually deteriorating, and we need to work very, very hard to look after what we have left and then to restore and improve it. There are some areas that are clearly off the table, which is good. But I think the game is to make sure that the Western Edge does properly get protected and that there isn't incremental incursions into the commitments when we get those actually carried out in our planning system. And we need to follow through. We've got some tenure issues with some of the areas in Blewett's Block. There's a little bit that's held by ANU. ANU seems willing to have that lead to a good area of protection, not development, but we need to follow through with a lot of these things. And I might not run through the rest of these slides because I reckon we've probably done an overlay of where things are up to now, but I might just sort of pause on how we can get good results from here. I find it really hard. I'm an environmentalist. I find it really hard because a lot of our climate and environmental campaigns are difficult and we don't always get great results from those. This one, I think we can. I genuinely think we can. We've got enough political overlap, and last term it was all Labor saying no, 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 we need to develop. We are in a completely different frame now where they are agreeing on top line. This is excellent. So all we need to do is actually just make sure we get the right outcome and that it gets delivered and implemented this term, because it's too risky to leave it for another term. You don't know what will change. We've also got really goodwill, I think, in the community and good understanding about the risks of climate change, the problems of sprawl, and a bit of willingness that Canberra will change over time and that we need more homes within our footprint. Another one of the campaigns that we're keeping a close eye on in the Greens and that we're quite concerned about doing well is making sure that we keep our green spaces and habitat and biodiversity network within our footprint, because we need to protect the Western Edge, but we also need to make sure as we are developing more that we are going up, but we are protecting all of those habitat corridors within Canberra. And that's part of what I consider is the Greens' job on the missing middle piece, is to make sure that we're doing that really well. But I reckon, Simon, that's enough from me. I might stop.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. I think there was just one quick tech question in there that I thought might be relevant to do straight away. It was just, could you explain, it was a question from Jane about, can you explain the call-in developer thing? Because I think you mentioned it a couple of times, but yeah.
Why, I would love to, Jane. Thank you. This made us very, very angry. And Rebecca Vassarotti is quite sweet-tempered, and she was very angry in the press at the time, if anybody was watching. What happened was there had been this long-running campaign to protect Blewett's Block that then sort of moved out to, well, actually, Blewett's Block is really important, but Blewett's Block, the environmental values there are kind of the same as the environmental values in the whole of the Western Edge. So, you know, we need to protect Blewett's Block, and we also need to protect the whole of the Western Edge. Long-running campaign, chipping away, trying to work with Labor, the community and the Greens, and many people were trying to work with Labor. And then all of a sudden, with zero consultation, no consultation from Labor's planning minister to the environment minister, nothing. Blewett's Block got called in for development. Denham's got called in for development. That call-in happened because I did this on FOI after the fact, 2 days after the developers asked the minister to call in development. Calling in development is under the old Act. We don't have this power anymore, but we have a different system now. It means that the minister steps into the independent planning system where they don't usually interfere, says, okay, this thing is going to go ahead. There are now no longer any appeals and there are no more processes to go through. We call in this development, it goes straight to DA and it gets built and nobody can appeal that, and there's no environmental or community rights to stop that development. It's a fairly big deal and it doesn't happen very often. We were pretty shocked that it happened there, and it actually accelerated the campaign, I think, to protect the rest and to step things up. We have used a range of tools to move on from there to both get the best outcomes for that area, but also to make sure that we are moving in more useful directions with Labor now, noting that it is clearly, we're in a world where a developer can write to a planning minister and get a development outcome very quickly if we don't do things well.
Thanks, Joe. That's great. Okay, so thank you so much for your presentation. That was really excellent and really informative. So I'd like to now hand over to Hannah Vardy, who is an advisor for Senator Pocock, and I believe Senator Pocock sends his apologies for not being able to attend today. But Hannah is working on the campaign for the Western Edge from their office, and will be able to speak really well to what they're doing in that office. So, Hannah, over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Simon. I'll just share my screen. Give me one moment. Wonderful. Is that coming through?
Oh. Yep, all good.
Wonderful, thank you. Awesome, thanks so much, Simon, for that introduction, and for both of you for presenting the overview of some of the Greens work and some of the Cons Council work in this space. I'd first like to reiterate Simon's acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I think one thing that's really struck me about this campaign, that's an amazing opportunity to turn these words into real tangible action. It's the opportunity to create a land and water management model that reflects the aspirations of the acknowledgement in handing back management of the Western Edge to vulnerable people here in the ACT. So by way of introduction, I'm Hannah Vardy. I work for Senator David Pocock, and I'm leading the Western Edge campaign work in his office. Also studying law, climate science and biology at the ANU at the moment, and ran for the Senate alongside David at this year's election. I've also been leading the Duty of Care campaign alongside 3 other incredible young women for the past few years now, working to enshrine legal protections for young people and future generations in the face of climate change. So I'm here today to discuss some of the work that our office has been doing on the Western Edge campaign. So here's just a bit of an overview around a high-level plan for the next few years, more of the focus on that kind of federal advocacy level, the big picture level as well. So we're currently in this first stage of the campaign, so building stakeholder support, building that community advocacy, working with the Conservation Council and others to build that support and advocacy around here in the ACT. And then in terms of sort of coming up into next year, we're looking, there's a federal budget pre-budget submission process that closes, I believe, at the end of January. And so we'll be most likely making a submission to that to ensure that we get some funding towards a First Nations led land management model. The government has already set aside money for things like the Indigenous Ranger program and Indigenous protected areas as well. And so there's some opportunities there to dovetail some of this work into those land management processes and ranger processes as well. And we're really looking to build that community support around that federal sort of funding there as well. So ultimately, we're looking to establish a model of non-award-led land management that is both ecologically and financially sustainable in the long run, which requires long-term federal funding and also sustainable funding from itself as well. So things like agriculture and ecotourism, and even the other idea thrown around having school visits. So all these 6 kids that come out to visit Canberra, why don't we make the Western Edge part of those visits and part of the story of Canberra and the story of our nation's capital. And so Joe and Simon covered some of those key advocacy pieces with the ACT in terms of the urban sprawl boundaries and protection for the Western Edge. What we're really pushing for at a federal level is to get, here we go. So securing, well, the first goal is to secure some money in the budget towards land management and ecological restoration of the Western Edge. And so there's some key things around here. We obviously saw in Bean how close that race came down to at the last election, highlighting that people down there want greater climate environmental protection, and they want to protect the Western Edge, and this is something that they are vulnerable on at the next election. So really using that as a strategy there as well, and then approaching the Finance Minister Katie Gallagher, who's also the other senator for the ACT, with a funding proposal for a co-management model with Indigenous rangers there as well. And then, as I mentioned, the pre-budget submissions are doing some costings and things around what the co-benefits for the community could look like around fire management, tourism, those school visits I mentioned, and again, really making a holistic proposal around what some of that funding could look like. So we've also set up, I'll get to the roundtable in a moment, but we've set up a governance working group out of the roundtable that we hosted a few weeks back to kind of facilitate that discussion to determine what the best model of management looks like for that pre-budget submission and what those details and the funding there could look like. There's things around, again, the Indigenous protected areas as well that we could look at, as well as seeking funding from philanthropy, as well as the global biodiversity framework to feed into this existing funding pool that they have for Indigenous rangers as well as a starting point. So there's a few different opportunities there, a few different sort of levers we can pull around getting some federal funding to, again, we want to protect the Western Edge from further urban sprawl. That's very much the ACT government's focus. I guess our focus is, well, what do we do in its place, right? What can this management practices look like, and developing these new and novel ways of working with vulnerable-led management and water management and land management to really kind of show that this model of co-benefits and model of land management works can be replicated around the country as well. So that's really the goal for us at the moment. And so a few weeks back, we hosted a roundtable in Parliament to bring together members of the local Ngunnawal community, as ecologists, community advocates, and legal experts to discuss a vision for the Western Edge campaign, principles to guide the campaign, and then ways of working together going forward. I note that Jane and a few others who attended that meeting are also online here today, so hello. It was really a great chance to bring together different perspectives on the campaign and discuss different ways of working together going forward. And through the discussion in the room, we kind of came out with the vision statement and some principles to guide this kind of federal campaign as well, and working really closely with the Conservation Council on this as well. These kind of set the foundations for the campaign and the goals and the vision and what we're actually trying to get out of it. Hopefully, once we protected that land for development, where do we go from there? And so I guess the vision, and this is something that was discussed and sort of tossed around in the room as well, and it is also open to revisions as well going forward. But at this stage, it's to protect the Western Edge by combining the Ngunnawal land and water management, conservation, and ecologically sustainable land use to develop a model that protects and restores biodiversity. So this vision reflects the goals of the campaign to bring together Ngunnawal knowledge with Western science knowledge and conservation and sustainable land use from existing landholders. So another element that was added in the meeting was around not only protecting but restoring biodiversity. I think we're really accustomed, and I know Joe touched on this as well, around some of the existing climate and environmental campaigns and some of the quite difficult work in this space. We're so accustomed to seeing environmental laws and management practices facilitating this decline in our environment rather than actively contributing to restoring it and contributing it to make it better than what it was before. And so what we're really hoping to do with this campaign is not only protecting it, not only kind of having it at this steady state, but actively improving the biodiversity, improving the ecological value of a really precious and high value piece of land as well, to kind of hope to provide a new model for restoration that can then be replicated all around the country. I won't labour these points too much, but some of the principles that came out of that roundtable as well were around protect, restore, return. So protecting the environment, restoring what's there, and ultimately returning it to First Nations management after a period of transition to kind of figure out what that model and the sustainability of the funding and things could look like. There's principles around transparency, around accountability, as well as science-based ecological management, embedding Ngunnawal land management practices there as well. And also this, the fourth element there around generating income. We know that often so many of these sorts of proposals get stood up and only last a few years and then fail for lack of funding and lack of long-term sort of sustainability there. And so we're hoping that by working on this model across a few different facets, we can try and build a way that it can become financially viable in itself around, again, tourism, agricultural, and school visits and things like that, to try and really bolster the long-term sustainability of the project as well. And then the last one there around not only ecological benefits, also cultural and educational benefits to the broader ACT and the broader Australian community through creating this model for what this could look like that can, again, be replicated around the country. So in terms of upcoming sort of events, as Simon mentioned, there's the Western Edge celebration happening on the 8th of November. So, and we'll be kind of supporting that there as well. The 1st of November at 9 AM, we're hosting a Western Edge tree planting and a sort of on-country tour. And so the Pocock will be hosting that as well. And so that will be bringing people out into the Western Edge. And we're currently confirming final details for the location and where's the best kind of, again, ecologically best place to go out and do some tree planting there as well. But we know that it's a really great chance to get people out into the Western Edge and experience just how special some of these places really are, as Joe mentioned before. We know that the first step towards protecting some of the places we love is to spend time in them, understand their value, understand just how important some of these places are for so many different reasons. And so alongside the walks that Simon mentioned, the Conservation Council is hoping we're hoping that these events can build support for protecting and restoring the Western Edge and keeping it out of the Territory Development Plan, and then looking towards a long-term sustainable management model that is working within the world mob here in the ACT as well. So as mentioned, we'll send through details for the on-country tree planting event when we've locked in the final details over the next few days. You can also sign up to receive updates and view this beautiful film that was made last year around just really highlighting the beauty of the Western Edge and what's there and the opportunity that this campaign presents to not only protect it, but restore it and hand it back to First Nations custodians as well. Also, that's it from me. Look forward to answering any questions and continuing the discussions. And again, please do send us an email if you'd like to stay engaged in some of those governance model processes and some of the roundtable discussions. We'd love to hear input that you've got as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Hannah, and thank you both for your great presentations. So we do have some questions that have appeared in the chat, and we've got about 15 minutes to answer the questions. So I'm just going to go kind of in order, and I know, Joe, you've answered a couple in the chat as well, so thank you for that. Appreciate that. So the first question is from Jane Clifton Bassett. And Jane says that I was talking to John Stanhope and he mentioned this campaign. He is very angry at Labor's destruction of his community housing initiative and was very concerned about housing for working class people. He also thinks it's unfair that the only option for poorer families is an apartment. His response was that the Western Edge has been farmed for 150 years and doesn't need to be protected. How do we manage these arguments about housing shortage? I've definitely got some thoughts on that, but I might hand over for the two of you to start off with. Does anybody have some thoughts on that?
Hannah, do you want to go first or me?
You go if you like.
I think the way I handle that is to acknowledge that we're in a housing crisis and we need to do more. The Greens have got policies that would address this. We wanted to buy and build 10,000 more public homes. The reason we picked that amount, which sounds really, really high, is because that over the course of a decade would get us back to the level of public home ownership that the ACT had 20 years ago. Our public homes have rapidly dropped off. We are also actively working on how we can assist approvals for public housing and community housing. Community housing is one that Labor dropped. Labor recently put up an amendment to remove community housing from our fast track scheme, and we're working on an amendment to put community housing back in. I would say public housing and community housing are serving equal needs. We also need to work on affordability. In terms of apartments, I probably wouldn't necessarily accept John Stanhope's view at all. Housing is unaffordable. Housing is absolutely unaffordable for anybody who isn't already in the market, and rent is unaffordable for many people. And you can be employed and homeless now in this town, which horrifies me because that is not the Canberra I grew up in. That is a true fact. We actually do have a lot of freestanding homes in the ACT. I think the problem is not that people can only afford a unit. I think the problem is that people can't actually afford anything at all. And I think what we need is more units, more townhouses, more small homes. We need more of all of those things, and that's part of the missing middle piece. We definitely need more homes, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the problem is that people can only afford a unit. I think the problem is that people can't afford a home at all.
Yeah,
Yeah, can I just, oh, you go. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Simon. Yeah, really agreeing with that. There's reforms around the missing middle, things that we're really in support of. There's sites like Ginninderra, as well, which is this kind of patch of land. I think it's between Northwood Avenue and Lytham there as well, which has a perfect site for things like urban infill as well. And so looking at sites like that don't have any sort of have nearly the same ecological value as Western Edge, but looking at places where we can support urban infill to support, again, building homes that people actually live and actually want to live are close to the city and are close to where existing services are, rather than kind of bulldozing and continuing to sprawl out into these new areas. And so I think it's, answering the question around further support for community public housing, things like scaling back negative gearing and all those kind of housing policy tweaks that would then result in building more public housing in the right areas at the right time, and making sure that then that those development plans and those processes are, again, focusing on those infill processes to make the best use of the land that we've got, rather than continuing this kind of destructive urban sprawl.
Yeah, just got a couple of things to add to that. I think part of the conversation that we want to be leading here at the Conservation Council is what kind of city do we want? It's not just about what we want to stop, but what does it look like to continue growing? And I think part of that is about housing choice and what it means. And I look at people in my friendship circle, my generation, the desire for a freestanding home, huge mansion is declining amongst a lot of people. I live in a townhouse on the light rail line, and maybe John Stanhope thinks that that's unfair that I have to live in a townhouse, whereas I think that's the best living arrangement for me and my family, and I really love it. And I think a lot of people are like that. And I know of people who have tried to search for apartments that suit their needs, bigger apartments. One of the bigger issues we have in the ACT is actually that getting an apartment is really hard if you have a family, because they're all 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. They're all designed for investors. They're not designed for people to actually live in. And I know of people who have searched for apartments and not been able to find them, and have ended up with freestanding homes when they wanted an apartment in the first place. So I think that actually, when we're talking about housing choice, we should be talking about what is a choice that people can that people like. And often, I think if we look at other cities around the world, families live in apartments very happily, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we can continue to have that conversation. And the second part of this is, I think this argument of it's just agricultural land, or some of it's just agricultural land, so we should demolish it, is also something we should be challenging. We need food. We need to have food, and we continue to develop over agricultural land. We're going to have an issue with our food bowl, and we're going to continue to rely on food from other parts of the country, high food miles, other sorts of unsustainable versions of agriculture. And I think that is something that we need to be considering. The ACT government has no agricultural policy at all. Agriculture is, that's at least what we've been told by the Rural Landholders Association.
No,
there is a food policy.
Yeah, I was going to say
but not a
full. Yeah, Rebecca brought that in.
Yeah, so there's a food policy, but not quite an agricultural policy. There's slight differences there, what I'm talking about. But often even the food policy is not being followed by the current government. There's not really being implemented. So, I think we need to be thinking about the food component of here, and we can't just say, well, that's just agricultural land, get rid of it. And I think that's something that I just wanted to make a point of as well. I would still be worth following on, because there's also a question from Claire that really relates to this, is can more be done to encourage new builds in existing areas of Canberra to be 2 to 3 stories rather than single-story houses? I know there's a push for medium density housing, but many new builds on existing blocks are single-story. So I'll just quickly touch base on this, Claire, because you will have heard about the missing middle quite a few times in this conversation. That's something that we at the Conservation Council support as well. That's a change to planning in the ACT that allows in a lot of zones in the ACT at the moment RZ1, which is the majority of ACT land. You're only really allowed to build freestanding houses. The missing middle proposal is to change that, to allow that, to mean that zone now we all can have townhouses, low, high, small apartment blocks, duplexes, these kinds of things. So it'll actually allow that across the territory, you can be building townhouses pretty much anywhere. And also increases the zoning capacity of other parts of zones in the ACT. And that's something that's been pushed for by community for quite a long time now. And we support it. And I think that there will be a push there to allow exactly what you're talking about, 2 to 3 story buildings in all parts of Canberra, which I think will be a really positive outcome. Does Joe or Hannah, do you have any comments on that particular policy as well?
Labor's very supportive of it. We actually kickstarted the timeline because we were worried they weren't going to deliver it this term. So we passed a motion in April to get that work underway to make sure that it delivers this term. I think it is moving in a good direction, but it also needs to come along with a consideration of the biodiversity network within our footprint while we're developing.
Do you have anything to say about density, how we can encourage?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think again, just agreeing with that. I mean, we even look at the fact that things around student accommodation and things too, about people love living close to where they work and where they study and things as well. And so encouraging some of those increasing density and building those communities and building capacity for, again, infill and densification and things in some of those key areas is really important. And so it's great to see that some of those missing middle reforms have been moved on.
2 more questions in the chat. One has already been answered, but I'll just repeat it. So the question from Bill Gemmell, he said, I do not see any reference to an Indigenous archaeologist study having been conducted over the Western Edge. My understanding is the Stanhope government may have commissioned such a study in the 2003 bushfires. Is there any knowledge? Joe, I believe you've answered that in the chat. So go and have a look at the chat for that one. Thank you for doing that. And then a question from Gordon. So most of the land is leased out as long and short-term rural leases. Has anyone spoken to the lessees about what they think about future development of their blocks, or whether they are willing to set aside some or all their blocks for conservation? And a follow-up is a question: how much of the rural land has been managed sustainably? Much of it was cleared for sheep farming many years ago. We are only really left with remnants of native grasslands and woodlands. Should the campaign be more focused on identifying and protecting these remnants? I think that is what helped Blue its block to get protected, as people could visit and see its value. Does anybody have any comments on that question about the rural lessees?
There are a lot of conversations going on with rural lessees. It's complicated, I would say. We've got some excellent farmers in the ACT who are using some sustainable practices, and also we have a strong and useful push from a lot of our ag farmers to better recognise and reward sustainable farming. We're not getting a lot of traction. We're not getting a lot of movement from the Labor government on that. I think the Labor government is not hugely supportive of agriculture. I would say the ACT never had a food policy. Rebecca Vassarotti put up our first food policy. It was quite hard to get it out. It is a good policy. It is currently unfunded, and I could not tell you which minister in Labor government is responsible for carrying it out, which is probably an indication of where that's up to.
Do you have any thoughts, Hannah?
Yeah, I think from some of the conversations we've been having around that area as well, I think there is, again, lots of goodwill there around sustainable practices and sort of wanting to work to kind of protect and restore some of the land that they've got there. And so I guess those, similar point conversations are ongoing and continuing to engage those where we can.
And just say the same thing. We at the Conservation Council have been working, been in liaison with the Rural Landholders Association, who are also frequent attendees at a lot of these kinds of discussions and having really good discussions with those groups. I would agree that not all of the land is sustainably managed, and I think that they agree with that too. But there also is a lot of land that is a lot of people who are doing really good things in this area. And so conversations about how to better manage some of that land is really important. But we were also struck, Aven and I went out to one of these properties that backs onto Mount Stromlo, and we had a look at the comparison between those lands. And often what we find in the ACT around things like weeding, for example, is that lessee land is better managed than ACT government land. And there have been issues in the ACT where rural lessees, land is taken to be an offset for development somewhere else, and then that land ends up in worse condition as an offset, as a nature park, than it was as being managed by a rural landholder. And so that's a real problem, and speaks to a bunch of the funding issues associated with the management of land in the ACT, where we put things into nature reserves and then they end up in very poor quality. Just quickly as well, Gordon, on the should the campaign be focused on identifying and protecting remnants? So one of the things that I've had some chats with some of our experts here is that there are certainly areas in the Western Edge that aren't the highest quality. There's no doubt about that. But if you look at the remnants, particularly of woodlands, any level of development in the Western Edge would require significant destruction of any woodlands. By the time you want to build a suburb, build the roads, build all of this stuff, the patches of woodlands are so consistent there that you would have to demolish a significant amount of it to be able to achieve any real development outcomes. And so while, yes, we'll point to specific areas that are of high quality, we need to be protecting the whole area, because the moment you look at it, if you look at how these patches work out, there's just no way to develop an area significantly without demolishing significant parts of high areas of ecological value. And so it's not like we can go and say, let's develop this small area that's not as high quality, because all of the infrastructure required would then demolish all of this other ecological areas of ecological value. And that's why we're talking about it as a whole, rather than just individual patches such as what we did around Blewett's Block. So we are now at 1 minute to 1. So I think that
we're at 1.
We're at 1 minute to 1 on my computer. So I think that is a good time to